the acting chairperson and members of the National Commission for Civic Education, discussants, guests, the media, ladies and gentlemen. I feel honored to have been nominated by the Honorable Chief Justice, His Lordship Enin Yeboah, to give this talk in his stead on the subject of amendments to the 1992 Constitution of Ghana. The choice of my good self for this assignment is undoubtedly on account of my previous association with the Ghana Constitution review processes commenced in 2010 by the distinguished President of the Republic at the time, the late Professor J.E. Atta Mills. It is my sincere hope that the brief comments I shall make here would contribute positively to the quest for a more rewarding and deeper transparent democratic governance in Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, given our checkered constitutional history, where every effort at the constitutional experiment since independence was until recently marred by one or other form of military or military coup police insurrection, it is no mean achievement to have lived under uninterrupted constitutional rule for 3 continuous decades. With a constitution that has survived this long, it is a welcome undertaking to engage in healthy and enlightened discussion on the workings of the Constitution with a view to unearthing its weaknesses and strengths. Therefore, the recent remarkable consistency with which discussions about the Constitution have been embarked on by actors at various levels of our national life is in itself very laudable. These discussions, apart from engendering higher commitment to the principles of our Constitution and compelling strict observance of them by persons who are entrusted with statutory authority, they also point out areas of the Constitution that do not appear to be working smoothly and need modification. It is in this sense that the NCCE deserves utmost commendation for organizing this high-level national conversation, which should serve to direct the discussions about constitutional reforms towards achieving some concrete goals. It has been stated with authority by the Supreme Court of Ghana that a recent constitution ought to be seen as a living organism which is capable of growth and development. See 24 verses Attorney General, 1980 Ghana Law Report 637. Therefore, it is normal that with the afflection of time, a constitutional document would need to change to reflect its growth and development. This reality was not lost on the framers of the 1992 Constitution. Consequently, they devoted the whole of Chapter 25 of the Constitution to making comprehensive provisions on processes and procedures for amending both the entrenched and non-entrenched provisions of the Constitution. Nonetheless, as the Constitution is the supreme law that lies at the top of the normative pyramid of our legal system, it must not be subject to frequent and trifling amendments, lest its sanctity withers away. As was explained in 24 verses Attorney General, the Constitution is a solemn legal document, political and developmental in nature. It is designed to reflect past values, regulate the present, and inspire the future of the nation. It provides for the longings and aspirations of the people for the realization of a better and fuller life, while making provision for a framework of governance necessary to achieve these objectives. However, society is not static, and what the aspirations of our nations were considered to be in 1992 may change with time. While we as a people are occupied with the uninterrupted application of the Constitution, some of our collective values disintegrate and are replaced by new ones. Some political priorities get overtaken by others, and some previously perceived urgent challenges cease to cause the anxiety that they created in 1992. In that connection, the Constitution must be reasonably stable enough to readjust to new realities of changing values and national priorities. It is an established democratic principle that judges, through the power of judicial interpretation, are permitted to interpret and apply a written constitution, such as ours, in a manner that reflects and gives effect to changing priorities, values, and national focus. However, the scope of judicial interpretation as a means for accommodating deserving changes to a constitution is highly restricted in matters where a particular policy choice has been expressly stated in the language of the text of a constitution. In the Supreme Court case of Republic versus Fast Track High Court, ex parte Daniels, 2003-2004 Supreme Court of Ghana Law Report, Kluge JSC said as follows, quote, "We cannot, under the cloak of constitutional interpretation, rewrite the Constitution of Ghana. Even in the area of statutory interpretation, we cannot amend a piece of legislation because we dislike its terms or because we suppose that the lawgiver was mistaken or unwise. Our responsibility is greater when we interpret the Constitution. We cannot and must not substitute our wisdom for the collective wisdom of the framers of the Constitution," unquote. The other limitation of constitutional amendment by judicial interpretation is that what judges may perceive as a new drift of national consensus may be disputed. Certain times, when the Supreme Court renders a decision that appears to dictate a particular policy choice said to be the intention of the framers of the Constitution, some vociferous sections of the society would challenge it and insist that the opposite of what the court said is a better policy choice for the country. To this end, I believe that while judicial interpretation may have a role in aligning our Constitution in penumbra areas left out of the constitutional text, since a Constitution cannot set out every conceivable circumstance and provide for it, after 30 years of existence, our Constitution requires certain significant reforms that can only be accomplished by resort to the amendment procedure in Chapter 25 of the Constitution. Gladly, the work of the Constitution Review Commission in 2010 resulted in a comprehensive report. While I do not intend to go through the findings and recommendations of the CRC, for they are well documented, it bears pointing out at least 3 key points of dissatisfaction Ghanaians expressed about the workings of the 1992 Constitution at the time of the consultations. These were: 1, deficits in transparent governance despite changing from dictatorship to constitutional rule in 1992. 2, continuous high levels of public sector corruption and lack of accountability for revenue from natural resource exploitation. 3, non-realization of real democratic dividend in the form of accelerated national development promised as attainable under constitutional rule. These were 3 key areas that Ghanaians said the Constitution had not lived up to what they expected. I will discuss the work of the CRC later on, but let me make the point here that since those consultations, Ghanaians continue to register their grievances with the governance under the 1992 Constitution and to call for amendments. The calls for constitutional reforms are getting louder of late and have spread to involve the younger generation, whose persistent failure to see a better future ahead of them after continuous changes of government appears to explain their awakening. It has dawned on many observers that as a nation we require something deeper than changing governments under the same Constitution, and that we need to take a hard look at the governance framework under our Constitution. For example, earlier this year, the immediate past chairperson of the NCCE, Mrs. Josephine Nkrumah, in a press release on Constitution Day, acknowledged that despite the remarkable achievements of the Constitution, there is the need for a reform and improvement of the constitutional infrastructure. And I quote here, "This will help tackle constitutional deficits and aspects of the 1992 Constitution that seemingly breed apathy from the public, disengages the public in major aspects of governance at the grassroots and national levels, further deepens marginalization, promotes excessive power of the executive, and festers the cause of corruption," unquote. I think the current chairperson made similar observations. Ladies and gentlemen, the momentum that surrounds the recent calls for constitutional amendment must not be brushed off or given little consideration. There seems to be a new spirit of constitutional consciousness rising among us, the likes of which have never been experienced in this country. We need to open our ears widely to the loud whispers of this spirit and be sensitive to its guidance if we are to achieve a better quality of life for Ghanaians. But it must be stated that the need for constitutional amendment was noticed shortly after the birth of the Constitution in 1992. When we commenced operating according to its provisions, we immediately realized that some of the policy choices made in the document were not playing out coherently as expected, and that led to the amendments of 1996, less than half a decade after the Constitution came into force. The 1996 amendments included providing for dual citizenship, which was barred in the original Constitution, changing the gratuities regime for members of Parliament, the inclusion of representatives of the National Commission on Women and Development, the Trade Union Congress, and the Association of Private Brokers in the National Media Commission. The 1996 amendments also made the President or his nominee the chairperson of the Armed Forces Council, rather than the Vice President, who was made the automatic chairperson of the Council in the original Constitution. Less than a decade and a half later, in 2010, the Constitution Review Commission, under the chairmanship of Professor Emeritus Albert Kojo-Fiajo, was established. The commission was tasked to ascertain from the people of Ghana their views on the operation of the 1992 Constitution, particularly its strengths and weaknesses, and to articulate the concerns of the people on amendments that may be required for a comprehensive review of the Constitution, and to make recommendations to the government for consideration and provide draft bills for possible amendments to the Constitution. The Commission carried out its mandate to the fullest extent and submitted its reports and recommendations to the government in December 2011. In June 2012, the government issued a white paper on the report of the Commission, in which it accepted most of the recommendations of the Commission. Subsequent to that, a 5-member Constitution Review Implementation Committee was set up by the government in October 2012 to drive the implementation of the recommended amendments in accordance with Chapter 25 of the Constitution. In spite of these significant strides towards amending the Constitution, we are yet to move the process to its logical end by Cabinet approving any constitutional amendment bills, forwarding them to the Council of State for the process under Chapter 25 to pan out. There is no doubt that the final process of amendments would definitely require the cooperation of both sides of Parliament. And I want to believe that there are some areas of proposed amendments that the major political parties, through their election manifestos, express consensus on. These include reforms to the local governance structure spelled out in the Constitution, and bringing backwards the date for general elections so as to provide sufficient time for a president-elect to constitute his government after elections. Changes to the local government system would deconcentrate the power over public resources which is presently vested at the center, especially at the presidency, and enhance the authority of lower-tier political structures to exact greater accountability for budgetary funds ostensibly allocated for development of their area of jurisdiction. In the area of local government reforms, it seems to me that what is needed for reform is political will, since the provisions of the Constitution on local government are largely unentrenched, and the mechanics for amending them does not involve a referendum. Considerable attention needs to be paid to the torrents of recent calls for constitutional amendments sweeping across the country, from religious leaders, civil society to politicians. Not only must the calls for amendment be given significant primacy, the necessary steps must be taken towards implementing constitutional reforms. As at the time the 1996 amendments were made, the Constitution had not lived that long, but as there was political will, some important changes were quickly made, and I believe those changes enabled the Constitution to deal with challenges that would still have been with us today if they had not been made then. Now, we have had enough time to assess the Constitution better, and studies have been conducted by academics, consultations undertaken on a wide basis, so we have no viable excuse to continue to hold back on effecting the necessary changes. It is relevant to note that one remarkable characteristic of the present calls for amendment is that all actors involved, political parties, civil society groups, and academics, agree that there is a need for some adjustments to be made to the Constitution. The divisions arise only around the extent which those divisions should cover. Whereas others call for a complete overhaul of the whole document, some are of the more minimalist approach, requiring the amendments of particular provisions. To those who call for the total overhaul, my advice is that there is no one-size-fits-all in democratic governance structure the world over. I say democratic governance structure because some others make calls for total change of the Constitution as if they have a problem with even the basic structure of the Constitution, including the human rights provisions. But it must not be easily forgotten that we framed the 1992 Constitution the way it is on the back of our political experience from pre-independence time. Some critics of our Constitution quote philosophical principles on democracy propounded in the 18th century and compare our Constitution to those of other countries and conclude that our Constitution is not democratic. However, whilst it is always good to learn from other people's experience, we should not underrate the thinking that informed our constitutional structure, which, if it has done nothing for us at all, it has kept us together as one nation without military intervention for 30 years so far. The stable constitutions we keep referring to took centuries to attain their stability through sustained efforts by consensuous political actors. In my personal opinion as a citizen of Ghana, the governance deficits under the 1992 Constitution I referred to above can be remedied by creative constitution-making processes without a complete change of the structure of our Constitution. Some time passed, a lot of commentators thought that the manner we structured our legislature under the 1992 Constitution made Parliament subservient to the executive, until the parliamentary election results of 2020 and the election of Speaker thereafter made them to revise their notes. The present composition of the legislature has posed some challenges to the speed with which government is able to actualize its plans. But it has equally hinted at the potential strength of our Constitution as far as the power of Parliament to hold the executive accountable is concerned. The framers of the 1992 Constitution must have foreseen this possibility and even other more challenging party permutations in Parliament. And they must have believed that we would exhibit the requisite democratic temperament on all sides of Parliament and scale over the challenges. It takes time to learn new rules when things change, such as we have confronting us with our current Parliament. But I am confident we shall overcome. Rome was not built in a day. So, I will conclude by suggesting that we should respond to the renewed calls for reforms by moving forward the 2010 process, starting with an identification of areas of apparent consensus indicated in the election manifestos of the major political parties, and galvanizing the resources and energies of civil society around this. I sincerely hope that such renewed effort would afford space for the arising young energetic civil society groups such as #FixTheCountry to influence the course of changing their future by channeling their creativity as the younger generation into results-oriented consultations. Thank you very much. Yes, I think.
Better